January 1959. Deep inside the frozen Ural Mountains of the Soviet Union, 9 experienced hikers set out on what should have been an ordinary winter expedition. They were young, intelligent, and highly trained. Most were university students or graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute. Together, they had completed some of the toughest mountain expeditions in the country. Their leader was Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student known for his calm personality, excellent navigation skills, and strong leadership. He carefully planned every detail of the journey, checking maps, routes, supplies, and weather reports before the team departed. The goal of the expedition was to reach Mount Otorten, one of the most remote peaks in the northern Ural Mountains. The hike was classified as a Category 3 expedition, the highest level of difficulty in the Soviet Union at that time. Only experienced mountaineers were allowed to attempt it. The group originally consisted of 10 members. Besides Igor Dyatlov, the team included Zinaida Kolmogorova, Rustem Slobodin, Yuri Doroshenko, Georgy Krivonischenko, Alexander Kolevatov, Lyudmila Dubinina, Nikolai Thibault Brignol, Semyon Solotaryov, and Yuri Yudin. Each member had a different personality, but they shared one passion: exploring places that few people had ever seen. Before leaving, they packed cameras, journals, maps, warm clothing, food supplies, medical kits, compasses, and camping equipment. Every kilogram mattered because they would carry everything on their backs through snow-covered mountains. The hikers traveled by train from Sverdlovsk to the small town of Ivdel. From there, they continued by truck to a logging settlement called Vizhay, the last inhabited location before entering the wilderness. The atmosphere was cheerful. Photographs taken during the trip show smiling faces, snowball fights, laughter, and moments of friendship. Nothing in these pictures suggested that this adventure would become one of history's greatest mysteries. However, before the group entered the mountains, something unexpected happened. One member, Yuri Yudin, began suffering severe pain caused by a chronic illness. After discussing the situation with Igor, he made the difficult decision to turn back. The other 9 hikers continued without him. As Yuri watched his friends disappear into the snowy forest, he had no idea he would become the last person to see them alive. The expedition moved deeper into the wilderness. Towering pine forests slowly gave way to open snowfields. Temperatures dropped far below freezing, and powerful winds swept across the mountains. Despite the harsh conditions, the hikers remained confident. They wrote jokes in their journals, took photographs, and carefully followed Igor's planned route toward Mount Otorten. None of them knew they were walking toward a mystery that would puzzle investigators, scientists, and historians for decades. The real nightmare had not yet begun. The 9 hikers continued their journey deeper into the Ural Mountains. With every passing hour, the weather became more unforgiving. Strong winds swept across the mountain slopes, and thick snow reduced visibility to only a few meters. Walking became slower, and every step required more energy. Even in these harsh conditions, the group remained disciplined. They carefully followed Igor Dyatlov's leadership, checking their maps and compass before changing direction. Their goal was still Mount Otorten, a mountain whose name in the local Mansi language is often translated as "don't go there." Although the name sounded mysterious, there is no evidence that the hikers believed it was cursed or dangerous beyond its difficult terrain. As they climbed higher, the trees slowly disappeared behind them. The protection of the forest was gone, leaving them exposed to freezing winds blowing across the open mountainside. On January 31st, 1959, the team reached the edge of the forest. Realizing they would need supplies for the return trip, they built a small storage cache. They buried extra food, equipment, and supplies beneath the snow, carefully marking the location so they could recover everything later. The next morning, February 1st, the hikers packed only what they needed and continued toward Mount Otorten. But sometime during the day, something went wrong. Investigators later believed the group drifted off their planned route because of poor visibility and blowing snow. Instead of reaching a safer area near the forest, they found themselves on the eastern slope of a mountain, known as Kolatsiakol. The mountain's name has often been translated as Dead Mountain. While the name sounds frightening, historians believe it simply referred to the lack of wildlife and hunting opportunities in the area, not to any supernatural legend. As daylight faded, the weather became even worse. Powerful winds slammed into the mountainside. Snow covered the ground within minutes. Temperatures plunged far below freezing. The hikers now faced a difficult decision. They could descend back into the forest, where trees would provide shelter from the wind, or they could set up camp on the exposed slope and continue climbing the next morning. For reasons still debated today, Igor decided to camp on the mountainside. Working together, the team dug into the snow and pitched their large canvas tent directly on the slope. They secured it with skis, poles, and ropes before bringing their backpacks and equipment inside. It was cold, far colder than any ordinary winter night. Inside the tent, the atmosphere appeared surprisingly calm. The hikers removed some of their heavy outer clothing, organized their equipment, wrote short notes in their journals, and shared dinner together. Several cameras recovered later contained photographs. Taken that same evening, the images show smiling faces, friends helping one another, people laughing despite the freezing weather. Nothing in those photographs suggested fear. Nothing suggested panic. Nothing suggested that only a few hours later, every one of them would be dead. As darkness swallowed the mountain, the wind continued to roar outside the thin canvas walls. No radio message was ever sent. No emergency signal was ever recorded. No one knows exactly what happened. Next, the only certainty is, this, sometime during the night of February 1st, something terrified all 9 hikers, enough to abandon the safety of their tent. That terrifying moment would become the beginning of one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. When the sun finally rose over the frozen mountain, the silence was absolute. Inside the tent, investigators would later discover evidence that made no logical sense, and the mystery had only just begun. Days passed after the hikers disappeared into the mountains. Back in Sverdlovsk, family members and friends waited for news. According to Igor Dyatlov's travel plan, the group was expected to send a telegram after completing the expedition. No message ever arrived. At first, no one panicked. Winter expeditions were unpredictable, and delays of several days were common. Experienced hikers often changed their schedules because of bad weather. But as more days passed without any communication, concern quickly turned into fear. The families contacted the Ural Polytechnic Institute and demanded that a search be organized. Initially, local officials believed the hikers were simply delayed. Eventually, growing pressure from the families forced the authorities to act. On February 20th, 1959, rescue teams made up of student volunteers, experienced mountaineers, soldiers, and local guides began searching the vast wilderness. The conditions were brutal. Freezing temperatures, deep snow, and powerful winds made every step difficult. Helicopters searched from the air, while teams on skis followed the hikers' planned route. For several days, the search found nothing. Then, on February 26th, one of the rescue teams spotted something unusual on the snowy slope of Kholat Shachol. Partially buried beneath the snow was the expedition's tent. At first glance, it looked abandoned, but as investigators moved closer, they noticed something deeply disturbing. The tent had not collapsed naturally. It had been ripped open. Even stranger, the cuts appeared to have been made from the inside. Instead of using the normal entrance, someone inside the tent had sliced through the canvas to escape. The rescuers carefully examined the campsite. Inside the tent, they found almost everything the hikers would have needed to survive. Sleeping bags, heavy winter coats, boots, food, backpacks, medical supplies, cameras, personal journals. It looked as if the group had left in an incredible hurry, leaving behind the very equipment that could have kept them alive. Outside the tent, investigators discovered a single trail of footprints leading away from the campsite. The footprints belonged to several people. Some were wearing boots. Others appeared to be wearing only socks. A few looked completely barefoot. Even more surprising, the footprints showed no signs of panic. They moved in an orderly line, descending toward the forest nearly 1.5 kilometers away. The search teams followed the tracks through the snow. Eventually, they reached the edge of a large cedar tree. There, they made the first horrifying discovery. Beneath the tree lay the frozen bodies of Yuri Doroshenko and Georgy Krivonishenko. Both men were wearing only light clothing. Neither had shoes. The freezing temperatures should have made survival impossible within minutes. Nearby, investigators found the remains of a small fire. Broken branches covered the ground. High above, several branches of the cedar tree had been snapped off, as though someone had climbed into the tree in desperation. The bark showed fresh damage. It appeared that at least one of the hikers had climbed several meters into the tree, perhaps trying to see the tent, or perhaps trying to escape something hidden in the darkness. No one knew. The questions were only beginning. If the hikers had escaped from the tent, why had they left behind their warm clothing? Why were they calmly walking through the snow instead of running? And what had frightened 9 experienced mountaineers enough to abandon everything they owned on one of the coldest nights imaginable? The answers were still buried beneath the snow. As rescuers searched farther into the frozen wilderness, they uncovered more bodies. And the injuries they found would leave even experienced investigators struggling for answers. After discovering the first 2 bodies beneath the cedar tree, rescue teams widened their search across the frozen mountains. The mystery only became darker. A short distance between the cedar tree and the abandoned tent, searchers made another shocking discovery. Hidden beneath the snow was the body of Igor Dyatlov. He was lying face down, his body pointing toward the tent. It appeared as though he had been trying to return to the campsite. His clothing was incomplete, offering little protection against the freezing temperatures. There were no fatal external injuries. Investigators concluded that he had likely died from hypothermia, few hundred meters farther along the same path. The rescuers found Zinaida Komogorova, like Igor. She also appeared to be moving toward the tent before collapsing. In the snow, her hands showed bruises and small cuts. Some investigators believed these injuries suggested she had struggled against the harsh environment, crawling through deep snow in a desperate attempt to survive. Not long afterward, the body of Rustem Slobodin was discovered. He too lay between the cedar tree and the tent. Unlike the others, Rustem had a small fracture on one side of his skull. Medical experts later stated that the injury alone was probably not enough to cause death. Like Igor and Zinaida, hypothermia remained the official cause. At this point, 5 of the 9 hikers had been found, but 4 were still missing. Weeks passed. Snow continued to bury the mountains. Search teams refused to give up. Finally, in early May, as warmer weather began melting the snow, rescuers made the most disturbing discovery of the entire investigation. Deep inside a ravine, nearly 75 meters from the cedar tree, the remaining 4 bodies were finally located. They were Lyudmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Alexander Kolevatov, and Nikolai Thibault-Brignol. Unlike the first 5 victims, these hikers were wearing extra clothing. Investigators believed they had taken some garments from the first victims after their deaths in a desperate attempt to stay warm. Then came the medical examinations. Several injuries stunned. Investigators, Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, had suffered a severe skull fracture. Semyon Zolotaryov had multiple broken ribs. Lyudmila Dubinina had devastating chest injuries. Even more shocking, her tongue was missing. Parts of her eyes and soft facial tissues were also gone. Alexander Kolevatov showed fewer traumatic injuries, but was found alongside the others in the ravine. Medical experts described the chest and skull injuries as extremely powerful. One investigator reportedly compared the force to that experienced in a high-speed car crash. Yet there were almost no major external wounds on the bodies. No deep cuts, no signs of a knife attack, no bullet wounds, no evidence that another person had violently assaulted them. The injuries seemed impossible to explain. Adding to the mystery, several items of clothing were later found to contain radioactive contamination. The levels were limited and remain a subject of debate, but the discovery fueled decades of speculation. Soon, newspapers across the Soviet Union began reporting strange rumors. Some people blamed secret military experiments. Others believed an unknown attacker had hunted the hikers. Some even claimed supernatural forces were responsible, but investigators had no clear answers. Every new discovery created even more questions. How could such powerful internal injuries exist without severe external damage? Why were some hikers found wearing the clothing of others? And what had happened during those missing hours on the mountain? The investigation was entering its most controversial stage. With all 9 hikers finally accounted for, investigators faced one final challenge: not finding the victims, but discovering what had truly happened on that frozen mountain. More than 60 years later, the debate still continues. Months after the last 4 hikers were discovered, Soviet investigators completed one of the most puzzling cases in the country's history. They interviewed witnesses. They examined the recovered equipment. They analyzed photographs, diaries, weather conditions, and forensic reports. Yet despite all of their efforts, they could not identify a single clear cause that explained every piece of evidence. In May 1959, the official criminal investigation was closed. The final report ended with a brief and mysterious conclusion. It stated that the hikers had died because of a compelling natural force. The report never explained exactly what that force was. For decades, that single sentence fueled endless speculation. People around the world began offering their own explanations. Some believed an avalanche had struck the campsite, forcing the hikers to cut their way out of the tent. Others argued that the slope was too gentle and that there was little evidence of a large avalanche. Another theory suggested katabatic winds, extremely powerful downhill winds, capable of producing terrifying conditions and loud, low-frequency sounds that can disorient people. Some researchers proposed that unusual weather, combined with darkness and extreme cold, may have caused the group to panic. Over the years, even more dramatic theories appeared. Some claimed the hikers had encountered secret Soviet military weapons tests. Others suggested classified experiments, escaped prisoners, or even extraterrestrial visitors. However, none of these theories has been supported by reliable evidence. No verified documents, forensic findings, or official investigations have confirmed any of those claims. In 2019, Russian authorities reopened the case to examine it using modern methods. After reviewing weather records, terrain, witness statements, and forensic evidence, investigators announced their conclusion in 2020. They stated that the most likely explanation was a small slab avalanche. According to this theory, a section of compacted snow shifted above the tent after it had been pitched into the slope. Fearing a larger collapse, the hikers quickly cut their way out of the tent and moved downhill. Once they reached the forest, they may have realized they could not safely return because of darkness, freezing temperatures, and strong winds. Some attempted to build a fire. Others tried to return to the tent. The remaining hikers sought shelter inside a nearby ravine, where a collapse into the snow and ice may have caused their severe internal injuries. In 2021, researchers published a scientific study using computer simulations inspired by avalanche models. The study suggested that a delayed slab avalanche could explain several unusual details, including why the tent remained standing while still producing powerful, crushing injuries. However, not all experts agree that this fully explains every aspect of the case, and debate continues. Today, more than 6 decades later, the Dyatlov Pass Incident remains one of the world's most famous unsolved mysteries. Many questions have reasonable scientific explanations. Others remain unanswered. What frightened the hikers during that freezing night? Why did they leave so suddenly? Did one single event trigger the tragedy, or did several disasters happen one after another? Perhaps we will never know. But one thing is certain. The photographs they left behind, the footprints frozen in the snow, the silent tent on the mountainside, and the lives of 9 young explorers have ensured that the Dyatlov Pass incident will never be forgotten. More than 60 years have passed since 9 experienced hikers vanished into the frozen wilderness of the Ural Mountains. Science has answered many questions, yet not every mystery has been solved. Whether it was a rare avalanche, extreme weather, or a tragic chain of events, the Dyatlov Pass incident continues to remind us that nature can be as mysterious as it is powerful. And somewhere beneath the silence of those frozen mountains, some questions may remain unanswered forever.
If you enjoy real unsolved mysteries and true crime documentaries, subscribe to Dark Files and uncover the next mystery with us.